discovering resources. Okay, well, at the conclusion of the last video, we really have our Configuration Manager instance installed onto our server, but we really don't have much more than that. Once we get the installation complete, there's a whole lot of additional configuration that's required in order for us to really complete actually getting the Configuration Manager server ready to accept data from its various clients. And one of the things we have to do here is actually begin the process of discovering the resources on our network. We're going to go through over the next couple of nuggets here is we're going to go through the configuration of Configuration Manager itself. We're going to go through and prepare our Configuration Manager instance for that receipt of data. We're going to install clients, we're going to discover resources, we're going to start collecting inventory, we're going to start bringing in the data that we need so that we can then later on take that data and use it for the distribution of packages and the querying of reports and those sorts of things. And this is really the first step in that process. So in this nugget, we're going to talk about discovering resources. And the discovery process, and this is very, very important, is not equal necessarily to the inventory process. And so what we're going to get out of discovery data is not the same as what we're going to get out of inventory data. And let me just stop there for a minute and talk for just a second about what this difference is. Inventory data is sort of what we're used to thinking of whenever we think of like the WMI store on a machine. So what's encapsulated in that WMI store, all of the configurations and the settings and the hardware makeup and the software makeup and the installed applications, all of that is what we consider inventory. And that's once we have the client on the machine, then we can begin to pull inventory and base our queries and collections off of inventory data. But before we can get the client, we need to make our Configuration Manager server aware that there is resources out on our network. And we do that through what's called discovery. And discovery is essentially when our Configuration Manager server goes out and begins using various tools to find what sorts of servers and workstations and network items are on our network. What it's going to pull back for us is much, much less information, but just enough information so that we know where that information is or where those resources are on the network. Once we know where those resources are, then we can use that information to deploy clients and eventually pull inventory. In our next nugget, we're going to talk about the deploying of clients. We're going to go from there and talk about the inventory process. So just for now, we're going to focus just on this discovery process. And now the main component of discovery is what we call the DDR. That's the data discovery record. Each individual resource, as we locate that resource in our environment, is going to have a DDR created for it. And this DDR includes a little bit of information that is processed by the Data Discovery Manager in order to put that information into the database. As you'll learn, there are lots of little inboxes and outboxes in Configuration Manager, and these boxes are the way in which the various components of Configuration Manager communicate with each other. We're going to talk about the types of discovery. We're going to talk about the 6 different types of discovery and what they do and when we would not want to bring them into our environment. And also we're going to do some configuring of that discovery and also the tailoring of discovery. You may find that there are certain elements that you want to bring in as part of your discovery record and certain elements you may want to leave out, and we can tailor that discovery as such. I want to start just for a second and talk a little bit about the DDR, that data discovery record that's used by Configuration Manager in really telling itself that resources are available on the network. Those DDRs are individual files, and they're files that contain data about the records that are found out on our network. They contain that information about discovered resources. And they're stored really, and stored is kind of a bad word, but essentially they're thrown into this inbox, in the /inboxes/ddm.box location. And they're thrown in there for long enough so that the Data Discovery Manager can actually, in Configuration Manager, can take that data and then pull it into its database so that it's officially part of that database. And one of the things you'll notice is and we'll go to this folder here in a second, is this ddm.box folder is a good location to spot to see if you have problems with discovering records on your network, discovering resources. Generally, this box is going to have somewhere between 0 and not a lot of records in it, because it's as the Configuration Manager goes through and pulls for entries in that box, it's going to remove them as it processes them into the database. So you'll see that information there doesn't really last in there very long. You can actually, and this is the really cool thing about this inbox-outbox mechanism that Configuration Manager uses, is you can actually manually create DDRs. You can create your own data discovery records, so you don't necessarily have to wait for Configuration configuration manager to find a resource out on the network, so you can manually create those, and it will just automatically ingest that into its database. And then again, all this information is processed by the DDM. I want to go take you for just a second here to this inboxes/ddm.box location so you can take a look at not only what this inbox is, but some of the other ones that are available too for, again, how Configuration Manager passes information back and forth between its various components. And so let me go ahead and minimize this. This is going back to our Configuration Manager server here, sccm nugget. You see I got the console up here. I'm actually going to minimize the console for a second and go to Start and Run. And I'm going to go to C, Program Files, Microsoft Configuration Manager. That's the root location for this installation. When I click OK here, you'll see that I've got a number of different folders that are subbed to it, and this folder here called Inboxes. You're going to see us go back to this folder, once in a while, just to show you these different locations that where information is passed back and forth. Now you'll see that there are lots and lots of different subfolders here with an extension of .box, or the folder name has a .box at the end. In our case, the one that we're interested in is this ddm.box. Again, each folder in this location is considered a box, or a mailbox, if you will, so that different pieces of Configuration Manager can send information to other pieces, and the other pieces can just occasionally pull that box for information that it needs. What you'll find is that there's a sum total of various processes that have to run in order for Configuration Manager to do what it does, and the way those processes intercommunicate is through this inbox system. If I go into the ddm.box location, you'll see there aren't any records here. We haven't actually configured Discovery to begin processing records, so we aren't going to see anything here. And again, be aware that you most often will not see any records in here anyway, because the processing of those records is there only between the time that the resource is discovered and the time that the information about that resource is ingested into the database. So you can kind of keep an eye on this and see records as they come in and come out and come in and come out. And if you create your own DDRs, which is something a little above the scope of this series, if you create your own DDRs and throw them in this folder, you'll watch them poof disappear after a few seconds or a few minutes as the Data Discovery Manager ends up pulling that information and ingesting into the database. So let me go back to my slide here, and we've already talked about the data discovery record. I'm going to bring up this third slide here, talking about the 6 different types of discovery. You'll see here that they're listed here: AD system and user, AD system group and security group, and network and heartbeat discovery. Now there are lots of different ways in which you can pull information into your database, and each one of these 6 different ways will pull information about users and computers and even network devices into your database, some of which may be useful to you, but maybe not necessarily all of which. And a little later we'll talk about the different types of discovery and when you may want to enable them. But what this can pull for you out of, say, Active Directory is information about the systems in Active Directory and information about the users in Active Directory. If you think about it, when you're attaching a Configuration Manager instance into your environment, you're probably going to be managing mostly systems that are already in your Active Directory. And so if they're already in your Active Directory, probably there's a lot of useful information in that Active Directory about the systems that we can pull in. So what this does is this will query Active Directory for information about individual systems and about individual users. We also have these 2 types of discovery called system group and security group discovery, and they will pull specific information as well. The security group down here on the bottom is designed for security group name and which domain it's in, and also which group container it's in, whereas the system group is actually going to pull information about organizational units and global groups and universal groups and nested groups and those sorts of things. So if you're looking for group information, you may want to enable these 2 discovery methods as well. We have the network discovery out here, which is designed for looking for things on the network. That may be things like routers and switches. Those may be printers. They may be systems that are not in Active Directory. They may be all systems. Essentially anything that sits at the other end of an IP address that can be queried and interrogated for information, maybe through SNMP, maybe through other methods, can be discovered using network discovery. And so we may want to enable this if we want to know more about those things that are on the network. And lastly, we have this thing here called heartbeat discovery. If you think about it, as we start pulling this stuff into our database, at some point we're going to get to the point where we want to go, wait a minute, maybe I've decommissioned some machines, or maybe some things have gone off the network and I want them out of Configuration Manager. When that happens, I want to set a heartbeat interval that says, okay, well, after a certain period of time, if you're not talking to me, if I don't get a heartbeat from you, if I don't hear that you're on my network, then I'm going to consider you no longer around. And so that's what heartbeat discovery is. It's simply a "are you still out there" sort of discovery for the clients that are already available for it. So that being said, let me go ahead and minimize this and go back to our list here. What we want to do now is talk about the configuration of discovery and how we're actually going to set it up inside of our configuration management server, and also how to tailor that discovery as well. I'll go ahead and minimize this, and I'm going to bring back the Configuration Manager console here. And you'll see I've expanded it just a little bit here to show the site management node for Configuration Manager. I've also removed the Actions pane here because the screen is so small, it's hard to see as much information. And any of the elements that are in the Actions panes will be replicated in the right mouse click. So what you'll see here is I have the site database. I have my CBN site here, CBN, my CBT Nuggets sccm site. And below that I have some site settings here. I want to first take you here to the site database where we can talk about those configuration of management points and failback status points. In order for us to be able to do discovery and begin install compliance and be able to get inventory, we have to have a management point set up in our environment. We have to have a server locator point in certain cases if we haven't extended our Active Directory schema, and we may want to have a failback status point and reporting point on our environment. Now, when we did the installation of our configuration manager, we've already done this configuring of a management point. If I click this link, you'll see that we jump down here to Site Systems, and we have our site system, which is sccm Nugget. You'll see now that this sccm Nugget has already been configured as a config manager management point. We have to have at least one of them in our environment to be able to begin doing all of these processes that we want to do with the clients. So be aware that that's there, and as you begin the initial configuration of your configuration management server, these are the 3 steps you're going to want to definitely check out. I want to jump forward then also to here, which is our site itself. We can see here information about the site, what sorts of elements are in the site, and then we can configure the individual settings associated with the site from the node that is subbed to that. Now, what you're going to find over the next 3 or 4 nuggets is specific. We're going to be spending a lot of time here under site settings. In this nugget, we want to talk about the discovery methods here. We'll get through pretty much all of these at the end of the next couple of nuggets. We want to talk about discovery methods because we're going to want to enable certain discovery methods based off of what kind of information we want to pull out of our environment. I'm going to start actually with the heartbeat discovery because it's kind of backwards actually, because this is once we already have records, we want to make sure that the records are still around and then stay around and then get flushed out whenever they're no longer needed. You'll see here that a heartbeat discovery is enabled by default, and that every 1 week our clients are said, okay, let's actually ping back to the server to let them know, hey, I'm still around. You may want to set this to a smaller or a larger number if the amount of change on your network is faster or slower, but we're going to leave the default here as our default heartbeat schedule is 1 week to ensure that our clients come back and talk to our server at least once a week to validate, yep, I'm still a client, I'm still on the network, I still need to be managed through you, Configuration Manager. Now that we've done heartbeat and make sure that the clients that we get them, that they'll stick around and they'll get rid of them whenever we no longer need them, let's go and look at Active Directory system and user discovery. We'll skip over to the groups a little bit later. Let's talk about system discovery here. I want to enable Active Directory system discovery so that I'm actually pulling my machines, the computers that are in my environment, into my configuration manager database. I can also choose containers that I want to create or essentially make as the boundary for system discovery. I can make it a local domain, I can make it a local custom namespace, or I can even do a custom LDAP or global catalog query if I want. I can choose a path here for, well, maybe I don't want the entire domain. Maybe I just want to do the computers OU inside my domain. If I choose that, then you'll see it creates that custom LDAP query for me. And I can say, okay, well, for this discovery, I'm only interested in discovering records that are in the computers folder, or in the computers OU inside of my Active Directory. In my case, I'm really interested in doing everything that's within the local domain. I want to pull all of those records that are actively in that local domain. You'll also see down here at the bottom that I have a couple of options for how I want to search within those containers. First of all, we have the option for recursive, and you'll see this is checked by default. Recursive means is if I have containers that are subbed to any of the containers, go ahead and check those too. So essentially bubble through the tree and look for everything that's maybe subbed to the location where we're at. Obviously, we want this because we're choosing the local domain. We want to make sure it goes all the way down through every one of the containers that's in there. We can also choose to search within groups as well. So if we have objects that are within groups, we can choose to we should choose to include objects that are within those groups. I'm going to check that box here and click OK. And now you'll see that we have begun the process of actually doing system discovery on our nuggetlab.com with recursive, and we are including groups. I can change the polling schedule if I want. You'll see here that every day, effective 1/1/98 at midnight, it looks like, it's going to begin that process of doing discovery. It's going to pull any information back out of the database. I can also choose to run discovery right now if I want to. And that's really a good idea. If I want to go ahead and run that discovery right now to get information in, I can do that right now by clicking this checkbox and then clicking OK. That begins the process immediately, and I don't have to wait for it. I can also choose, and this is to the concept of tailoring Active Directory and tailoring the information I want to pull out of Active Directory. I can tailor which of those object attributes I want to discover for each of the records I find in Active Directory. So think about this, right? Inside of my Active Directory, I have a number of different objects, or a number of different properties associated with each of the objects. You'll see here there's a GUID, there's a name, there's the path, there's an OS, maybe a domain. All of these information, all these properties are stored about each of the objects in my Active Directory. Now, you're probably asking at this point, well, okay, well, how do I know what properties are available, what attributes are available to me if I want to add some more? If I click the little star here, I can choose to add a new directory attribute name if I want. The way that I find them out is actually to go back to our old friend ADSI edit. If I click on Start and Run and I type in ADSI edit.msc, I'm going to bring up ADSI edit again. And you'll see here I've expanded automatically from domain to my domain nuggetlab.com. If I scroll down and look for computers and I find, oh, let's see, here's sccm nugget, my computer, and choose the properties on that computer. Again, this is because this is Active Directory system discovery as opposed to user discovery. These are all of the attributes available about the system that I am attempting to discover. Well, what are the allowed attributes, and what are the bad password time, and what's the canonical name, and what's the create timestamp, and all of these. If there's one that I particularly like and I want to make sure that I pull that information from Active Directory into my database, I can do so by locating it here. Maybe here's last logon information, for example. I can say, okay, last logon is the attribute that I want to pull. I click OK, and I get rid of ADSI edit, and I say last logon, and now I'll begin to collect last logon information from any of the Active Directory objects, the system objects that I'm attempting to pull from. If I go back to polling schedule, you'll see here that we're going to run that discovery as soon as possible. Once I click OK, now in the background, Configuration Manager is going to begin the process of looking for systems out of Active Directory. We will, within a very short period of time, begin to see those systems inside of our list of available systems. And then we'll be able to push clients to them and manage them using Configuration Manager clients. Active Directory user discovery looks very, very much the same as system discovery, but instead of actually looking for computers that are on our network, we're going to be looking for individual users that are on our network. And you want to be careful here, because you're probably going to want to collect inventory for individual computers. You're probably going to want to push packages and push updates to particular computers based on their computer attributes, what applications are on them, where they may be located in Active Directory, where they may be located physically. But you may not necessarily need to gather information about your users. If you're not planning on deploying applications based on usernames, then you may not necessarily need to activate user discovery. Again, activating it is as simple as checking this box, but pulling that begins the process of pulling that information into my database. But if I find that I don't really need this, I'm just wasting processor cycles by going through this process of discovery. I'm going to leave this unchecked for now because in a lot of cases we do a lot of deployment of packages based on computer information, but maybe not necessarily based on user information. If I wanted to, I can set the boundary for user information in the same way that we set the boundary for computer information here, by domain, by custom query, namespace, and then these various search options. Again, similar to system discovery, we have the same polling schedule, and we have the same ability to add additional attributes that we pull from Active Directory users. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here because we're not going to make any changes to user discovery, but maybe we want to know something about system group discovery here. Let's take a look here, and we look at the ability to pull groups. I'm going to click here to enable system group discovery and set the container again to the same local domain. You'll see here it's all very, very similar to what we're seeing in the other instances as well. I can click to run discovery as soon as possible as well down here. Security group is very similar to the system group, except I'm looking for individual security groups inside of my domain. Click here, click local domain, click OK, and begin engaging for security group as well. The last thing I want to do here is engage network discovery. And this is another one that you have to be kind of cautious about. Because if you're not interested in managing the network devices that are on your network, then you may not be interested in also keeping them inside of your configuration manager database. By enabling network discovery, I'm going to begin to look for topology, client, and client operating system for things that are on my network. It may be routers, it may be switches, it may be Windows devices, it may be Linux devices. It's essentially anything on my network that responds to an IP address. The difference between these three different types of discovery has to do with the amount of information you want to pull back. The topology information really is going to give you more or less IP addressable resources. Anything that can be that's at the other end of an IP address, I can pull the information out about it. If I want to know essentially kind of what is at the other end of that, what kind of client, what sort of resources like printers and gateways and SNMP resources are available at the other end, I can choose topology and client. If I want to get even more detailed and find out what the OS of those clients are, I can choose the bottom one here to pull not only the IP address information and not only the what are you information, but at what level are you at information here for type of discovery. If I have a slow network, I want to say, okay, I want to be aware, I want to make Configuration Manager aware that my devices may be responding on a very slow network. I can choose this box to indicate that, yes, this is a slow network. If I decide to choose network discovery in here, once I choose it, then I need to constrain my discovery to where I want to begin searching. And I have the option between subnets and domains and SNMP strings and DHCP servers and individual SNMP devices for what am I looking for? What sorts of places on the network am I looking to go? If I click on subnets here, I can choose a subnet and a mask associated for that subnet. Let's say I'm looking for the 192.168.0 subnet and a mask of 255.255.255.0. This will look for everything from 192.168.0.1 through 192.168.0.254, for example. And this is going to begin enabling that subnet search for those locations. If you're not comfortable with subnets, you'll have to be aware of how you define the name for the subnet and how you define the mask for the subnet to determine where it's going to go. In terms of domains, I can choose individual domains that I want to choose. In my case, this would be nuggetlab.com. Maybe I want to search through a domain for any information that is inside of that domain. Maybe for my SNMP devices, I may have an SNMP community string, a read string that instructs the device, or that gives privilege to Configuration Manager to interrogate the device for information. Maybe there's a password, ORD, bang. There's my password that's an SNMP community string to attempt to query the device for information. I can choose how many hops. If I have multiple hop network, how many hops do I want to go before I stop actually attempting to locate additional devices across routers or across switches or those sorts of things. Maybe I have particular SMP devices that I want to choose. Maybe I have an IP address or a device name that's out of the network, and I want to make sure that I specifically attempt to discover those resources that are at the other end of that IP address. Maybe I have DHCP servers that may have DHCP client information in there, and I can choose an IP address or a server name of a DHCP server that may be serving up addresses to other clients on my network. And then lastly, I can choose a schedule for network discovery as well. I can say, okay, when do I want discovery to run, and what is the recurrence pattern associated with discovery? Maybe I have it just run one time. Maybe I have it run weekly or monthly, or a specific custom interval that allows me to choose when I want that to run. Because of the way this is configured, I can choose multiple schedules by creating a schedule, setting it, and then creating an additional schedule again. So I can create multiple schedules for network discovery and when I intend it to run. Again, if you're interested in this information, this is going to help you with pulling information that may not be in Active Directory. Maybe you have some clients out there that aren't in AD, or maybe you want to see what routers and switches and printers are on your network. If you're planning on managing that information within Configuration Manager, then you're going to want to enable network discovery. But be aware that you may or may not be able to install clients and fully manage those because they may not be Windows clients. So in our case, we're actually going to keep our database relatively slim and keep network discovery disabled in this case because we don't want that extra information in there, that extra data in there that may be confusing us about whether or not it's useful or not. So I'm going to click Cancel here. Out of the 6 types of discovery methods that we have available to us, we've enabled both of the group discoveries and system discovery and heartbeat discovery here while leaving user and network alone. If at some point later on, this is the power of Configuration Manager, we find that we may want to actually actually bring in user information into our Active Directory, we can do so by simply enabling user discovery at some point in the future. So that's all available to us. So what have we talked about? We've talked about the process of discovering resources and how discovery and inventory information is definitely a whole different ballgame. And discovery is the little bit of information, while inventory is the real meat of it. We talked about the DDR and the types of discovery, and also how to configure and also how to tailor the discovery so that we pull just the information that we need, we don't overload the database, and we don't add additional processor cycles that we don't necessarily want to have in the way of what we need to get done. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.